we also have a new governor. And we also have a new governor who kind of harkens back to another time. His father, who was also governor. His father was a traditional democratic liberal. This son is making real sure that no one should make a mistake. He is not like his papa. So he makes a new announcement right after he wins the election about how in his mind the great problem here in New York, which has a big deficit, needs to be addressed by really sticking it to the public employees. They're going to have to share the pain. Who's paying? They're going to have to be fired. They're going to have to lose their pensions. Murky and lurking in the background in all of these stories is a looming crisis of a new kind. There seems to be mounting pressure in the United States to basically break the promise made for the last 50 years to 2 to 3 generations of American workers who got public sector jobs. If you work here, you do your job 30, 40 years, and you retire, you will be given a retirement. Lest you misunderstand this, this was a commitment made in lieu, in many cases, of giving them higher wages. It was part of a negotiated package. The workers would come to work for a combination of wages and benefits. And those benefits, high on the list, was a certain kind of retirement that would allow you to live a decent life and not be a burden on your children. And the movement now is to begin to renege on that promise, not to pay pensions, to cut the pensions, to cut the terms of the pensions. It's already being done, and a number of cities and states have already done this, and more are doing it all the time. It takes a variety of forms, but it is beginning to be orchestrated, and I urge you to pay attention in the months ahead, as a conflict between two adversaries that we're not so used to here in the United States. Not whites and blacks, not men and women, but old and young, in which the burden of the pension will be redefined as the burden on the mass of younger people to pay these outrageous taxes to sustain these no longer working fill in the blanks. And a struggle. Should we suffer, we younger folk, to sustain those who are going to die soon and use up too many services as they die? That changes our political environment. It affects many communities. It'll affect voting patterns. It's an awesome process that is underway just below the surface, but coming to the fore as we have this crisis. Last point. This economic crisis, it begins officially in December of 2007, which has produced this 10% unemployment rate that doesn't go down, these foreclosures which go up, and a whole host of other dilemmas, is a little bit like that famous story of a flood in which a little boy or a little girl puts her finger in a hole in the dike to hold back the water, and then almost in cartoon fashion, no sooner has he or she done that than a leak springs somewhere else, and the child runs to the other place, puts his or her finger in there, only to discover another leak, and you kind of watch the tragedy and the humor of it all. And it is, in its own sick way, a kind of funny thing. This crisis pops up here, there, and over with everywhere else. No sooner is it gone than it resurfaces. So, for example, for the last 2.5 years, we've heard a great deal about many things, but not about cities and towns. Now that the banking crisis is a little bit off the immediate burner, we have city and towns exploding. For a while it looked like Europe was going to escape compared to the United States. Then it had a whole summer, last summer, of catastrophe. That seemed to be assuaged, but now it's coming back, and it looks like Europe is going to have a big problem. Because even the parts of Europe that did all right, Germany and Northern Europe, They depend on selling a huge amount of their output to the rest of Europe, which is going through the kind of cutbacks I just described for New York's state and California and our cities. And if Greece and Portugal and Spain and Ireland can't buy the output of the rest of Europe, that is a crippling phenomena for all of Europe. So no one knows. And if Europe has a great deal of problem, we get hurt because we depend on Europe as a market for our exports and so on in all kinds of complicated ways. Conclusion, then, let me segue from a discussion about cities and towns, which we're going to come back to give a more general overview of how things have gone in the last month. Basically, not much has changed from what we talked about and surveyed in early December when we had our last meeting. What do I mean? There continues to be a recovery. That is, banks in the United States continue to basically do real well. With great pride, several of our largest banks, which continue to get government guarantees and government subsidies right now, announced that they are going to resume dividend payments during the course of this year. That is, they're making enough profits to begin to distribute them to the shareholders. So the banks are doing really nicely with the $1 trillion+ that the government, i.e. you, have contributed to renewing their balance sheets, to improving their situation. They are recovering. The stock market, which was doing more nicely the last time we met, is a little flat now, but it hasn't tumbled. And that's already considered to be pretty good news, although the consensus in Wall Street is that there will be, this lovely term, a correction of 5 to 10% over the next few weeks. So for those of you that were anticipating making a major leap into the stock market, don't do that now. Or if you do, remember what I just said. Don't do that now. And that's because the uptick in the stock market of the last few months looks to almost all the professionals as a lovely event for which there is no justification. And when you see that situation, the next step is usually a correction in which it suddenly dawns on everybody that they're holding on to something that could collapse. It's a little bit like that cartoon you may remember from childhood when the cat is running down the road and runs off the edge of the cliff, goes in a straight line, looks down, realizes there's no soil, and then drops. Nobody wants to be caught holding shares of stock when you have a level of value that is unsustainable. So it's a weak, inadequate recovery. That's a consensus view. No one knows how long it can be sustained. Every time anyone says to you something about a recovery, you don't need to be a leftist or a radical to make fun of it. There are plenty of people who are not leftists, are not radical, really have no use for those terms, don't know what they mean anyway, who share the point of view that whatever recovery this is very limited and very, the word they like, fragile. For example, we depend desperately as a society, for even the little bit of recovery we have, we depend desperately on a quote-unquote normal relationship with the People's Republic of China. For those of you that are not used to it, you should, with me, enjoy the ironies of this situation. Let me repeat myself. We are desperately dependent on a good relationship with the People's Republic of China. I believe the head of that government has arrived in Washington either today or will tomorrow. I don't know exactly when he's coming. And there's the most elaborate dance imaginable of all our highest officials promising, cajoling, begging to have this relationship sustained. Of course, that has to be balanced with what is needed by domestic Republican politics, which is a demand that they allow more freedom of expression. This is as relevant to what is being discussed in Washington as there are weather conditions in the eastern Tyrol. And if you're not much up on those, then don't worry about security concerns or Nobel Prize winner living conditions and so forth. That is pure and unadulterated fluff and not to be taken seriously. What is wanted from the United States is a bit more of an open market in China to unload the stuff we can't sell anywhere else. And in exchange, China will get what it wants from the United States, which is access to that technology that the United States industry has that they don't have yet. And for those of you that read the New York Times, which does, not often, but occasionally, have actually, relevant news about economic conditions. They did have a relevant story the other day about General Electric and how General Electric is now partnering with China to produce the next generation of jet aircraft that will be heavy competitors of Boeing and Airbus, the two other producers of high-speed jet aircraft in the world. And if you know anything about high-speed jet aircraft, you know that that's not only a question of cargo and people, but that's the same technology that fuels the Air Force, the military competition between the two. So General Electric had to get the permission of the United States government to go ahead and basically provide the People's Republic of China with all the latest technology on jet engines, and was desperate to get it and got it. So that the People's Republic of China will get jet engines, and the United States will be able to sell more materials inside China. If and when the Chinese government, not known to love the United States any more than it is loved by the United States political establishment, if and when the Chinese government, for any reason, needs to change its policies, the dependence of the United States economically on that situation renders our recovery extremely vulnerable. The same is true with what is evolving in Europe, how the euro goes, how the relationship between the better and less well-performing parts of Europe go. All of those conditions shape how well our recovery can be sustained, weak and uneven as it is. So please be aware that whatever you hear about recovery, it usually is a hype and a little bit of effort. For example, you can go on the web if you're interested and just go to Bloomberg.com. Yes, the mayor, not the mayor as politician, but the mayor as the owner, operator of the most important basic economic news service in the world. If you go to Bloomberg.com, you will get an ongoing assessment of the weakness and fragility of the recovery, and you won't need to listen to your evening news commentator who basically either doesn't understand what's going on or repeats the latest press release from whatever agency is trying to suggest that the recovery is in good shape and underway. Not the least danger to the recovery is the crisis of all of our 50 states and all tens of thousands of our cities. If they continue to do what I just told you about California and New York, raising taxes, cutting jobs, cutting services, they're going to make the situation worse. The dysfunctionality of an economic system is usually best seen when you can identify how it works at cross purposes with itself. We don't need an external threat. We are dissolving from inside. We are forced to do things that make no sense. If you look at most state government budgets, you will see that one of the major discretionary items, the money that they can save, is in the area of public education, and particularly public higher education. So let me remind you of a statistic I have mentioned here in the past. Every reasonable commentator, left, right, and center, about the American economy in the years ahead, faced with world competition, must produce a high quantity and a high quality